So when you think of prominent figures in the UFO space, I don't think a name comes up more often than Bob Lazar. And for good reason as well. He was, if I'm not wrong, one of the first people to make really explicit and specific claims about UFOs and how they work and the technology behind them. And, you know, in our previous episodes, our co-hosts have gone into, you know, the stories of abductions, you know, the events that happened. But me personally, what I'm really, really interested in is the engineering and the technology behind UFOs. That's what interests me most, like how UFO technology works, how their spaceship works, what kind of mechanisms and processes are behind, you know, their devices. And Bob Lazar has made some pretty dubious and interesting claims that we're going to get into today. But off the bat, have you guys heard of any specific claims from Bob Lazar? You know, floating around?
What's funny is I can remember the first time that I saw the infamous Bob Lazar interview, and I think it was a brief period, and it still might be on there, when Netflix had various, you know, just assorted UFO disclosure documentaries on there. One of them had Dan Aykroyd smoking a cigarette and talking about UFOs, but another one, and it might have been the same one, had Bob Lazar, and he was the thing I remember specifically from the interview, and I know you know this, Tyson, that caught me was he spoke about how it wasn't a propulsion system that moved these UFO craft that you would, you know, typically be privy to within the bounds of our normal physics. They're more, when they tilt, it's like they're moving the world. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like when they're like, they're doing something when they tilt where it's not like they're tilting and a rocket engine is pushing them. It's like they're distorting the world around their ship or the area behind their ship, and it's like an anti-gravity system that pushes them.
You're getting very close to that.
The way I understood it was like if you place a bowling ball on a bed and then like ping pong balls around it, the way the ping pong balls kind of
like relativity almost.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way I like to imagine it, right, is that if you get an apple and you drop it to the floor, it's traveling downwards to the floor. Imagine if you could flip that vector of direction into any vector you want, you know, make it go sideways and all that, but the apple would still be falling in that direction, you know? And this is one of the first claims that Bob Lazar makes. He claims that the UFO that he studied in Area 51 was propelled by a gravity wave propulsion system. So apparently it amplifies gravity in a singular directional vector, and then there's a sort of like, so if you amplify the gravity north of the ship would fall in that direction. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And I do think it's funny, the different things or different aspects of the paranormal that people find interesting, because to me, I don't want to know how UFOs are powered. I don't care. I'm not concerned with the physics of it. That kind of almost ruins the mystique of them for me. But you are interested in that. That's a subject that you like, and
that's the thing I care about the most.
Yeah. So,
this gravity wave propulsion, it's also how they're able to exert anti-gravity-like properties. You know, how they can hover and perform seemingly impossible maneuvers, right? So, people love to bring up how UFOs can pull these maneuvers that, you know, with the G-forces they should be like physically impossible for any living organism to survive. But if you think about it, if you're able to manipulate gravity, it doesn't really matter what G-force you feel, because you can just counteract that with a balancing gravitational field.
You'd bypass inertia completely, so it'd almost be
exactly
like you'd be stationary inside the ship.
Yeah, and if you could somehow manipulate gravity, I feel like that would mean that you would be able to act, the craft would be able to act as a massless particle, you know, the same way that a photon or electromagnetic wave would act in space, you know? But leading on to what powers this, right? So, one of the second claims that Bob Lazar has made is that the entire system, the gravity propulsion, the spaceship, all its moving parts, it was powered by an element called element 115, right? And it was the fuel source for the alien propulsion system. And the way that he described it, it's really interesting. He said that, so I'll lay out the groundwork for how atoms work. Just a really quick thing. But atoms are held together by two nuclear forces. The strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. The strong nuclear force is like what binds, protons and neutrons and electrons together in a nucleus.
It reminded me of high school.
I think they also used to call that fundamental force as well, didn't they?
It is one of the four fundamental forces, yeah. But basically, he claims that element 115, its strong nuclear force, actually exceeds the boundary of the atom itself. So it's one of the rare atoms where the force is outside of the actual space of the atom, and you can somehow manipulate that to power your ship.
That's certainly something.
And it's certainly it's not crazy either, because I mean, if you look at 115, I mean, we have element 115 now. We synthesized it, if I'm correct. But yeah, I mean, it's not crazy to say that an element as dense as that could possibly have properties like that.
So, just so I get my timeline correct, and this is something that you hear talked about whenever Bob Lazar comes up, and I swear I'm not confusing him with another UFO circuit favorite and one of Ari and I's favorites, Phil Schneider. But didn't Bob Lazar mention element 115 and its properties? But the initial conversation was that, okay, maybe it does exist, but only for a split second in a hadron collider. And then it was found to actually exist. Or didn't he somewhat prophesize the discovery of 115? Right?
He predicted element 115 before the element was ever synthesized or even hypothesized by scientists at the time, right?
Really?
I'd like to add as well, the one that we synthesized was an unstable isotope. Whereas Bob Lazar claimed to have a stable form. The
isotope that Lazar talks about, it's stable, it doesn't decay, and when you apparently bombard it with protons, it releases an incredible amount of energy. And here's the cool thing. Apparently, the byproduct of using it for energy, it creates antimatter as a byproduct waste result of that. So that's kind of like a double energy thing, Like, not only do you get energy from bombarding it with protons, but you also get free antimatter as a result of that. That's what's powering the anti-gravity and the gravity wave propulsion thing.
It's funny that you say, I don't even know if it's funny, but it's just nice to hear you bring this up, and going back to when I watched that initial Bob Lazar interview, which is more than 10 years ago. I've seen it at this point. I was already mostly interested in the paranormal and UFOs too when I saw it, but that only further piqued my interest. When he was talking about it, it felt so new to me, but also the way he was explaining it wasn't fantastical sci-fi. It kind of felt like it was grounded in realism and kind of like our understanding of physics today, but just kind of beyond what we can see, hear, and experience. It was it was something new, kind of what he was saying, and it made people think about the phenomena of UFOs in a completely different way, because a lot of people like to say, ooh, they're actually interdimensional, or they just travel through wormholes, or no, they actually are just physically traveling that entire distance, or no, they're coming from the center of the Earth, which is my favorite one. I think his explanation is kind of a way of grounding that conversation and at least giving it a direction.
No, you're right. I do love the fact that it's like grounded. It seems like the way he describes it, it makes it seem like it's sort of attainable as long as we unlock like the right techniques and methods,
Yeah, and you know what else helps his case is that whether you want to get into his credibility or not, maybe we will later, but he is not dumb. Okay, he's at least smart he's at least at the intellect of what you would expect of a scientist. right? I think he's proven that through his experimentation and his explanation of phenomena. So he at least has that going for him. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Another claim that he made to verify his sources was when he claimed to be working in Area 51, one of the security measures that he described that he had to go through every time he went inside the area was, and keep in mind, this was in the 70s, I believe, right? He alleged that to enter the facility, there was a hand scanning device that if he put his hand inside, it would scan his hand, and it could tell each person's identity by the what appeared to be fingerprints, right? But we find out later that it might not just be fingerprints. And the cool thing is that he made this claim in the 70s. More than 40 or 50 years later, I think through some like Freedom of Information Act document requests, we find out that, you know, the US government actually had this sort of technology even back then, where they would take this miniature X-ray scanner and they would scan a person's hands and measure like the bone density of each of their fingers. And because I think each person's bone length and density was different, that was the signature that allowed them to have biosecurity on that level. And it was really that was like the second piece of his claim that really added to his credibility, you know?
Yeah, and it sounds like a counterintuitive statement, but it's almost the explanation of modern ancient aliens, where not that there were aliens here thousands, millions of years ago, what have you, but within the last 200 years, we've been in contact with some sort of extraterrestrial species, or were able to procure some sort of technology related to UFOs, and we've been using that for ourselves, and that's why there's been such a gigantic leap in technological innovation over the last century.
It's interesting
or two.
you say that, 'cause
people love to talk about that.
So Lazar also talked about how when he was around the hangars, he saw a total of 9 crafts, and he was told through a book, which we might talk about later, that at least one of the UFOs that they found were an archaeological finding, meaning that it was ancient.
See, that blows my mind. It's like,
that's a little
that's
too
crazy.
That is interesting, and
I really want to believe that, though.
Yeah, right. Well, that again,
he himself actually he makes a comment on that, like he has doubt himself, and I guess we'll get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's also an X-Files episode, but I don't know which one came first. I think the X-Files episode came after what he's talking about, which, you know, gives further credence to him. But I'll just say real quick, and I don't want to get too nuanced with it, but a lot of what Bob Lazar talks about makes me think that he was led to believe that he was working on an extraterrestrial craft when it was really just identifying and checking modern inventions that were made elsewhere within the government, kind of as like a
so it's interesting
as a
you
tester.
say that.
And then he divulges that information because he said himself that the work that he did was highly regimented and specified. Someone could be working on something completely different within the craft, close by onto what he's working on, but they have no idea what each other is actually looking at, which is, kind of like a regimented engineer style of doing things. So I understand that, but there was a secrecy involved with it. So it's almost like he was fact checking modern government technological work, or experimenting with it, and he didn't know that. Maybe it could be that, but maybe it was all based off of alien craft anyways. There's a lot of ways you could look at it and have fun with it. So
he himself actually, there was an interview out there where he talks about how he thought the same thing. He thought this must be a government thing, because he, contrary to popular belief, he hated the idea of UFOs and aliens. He thought it was ridiculous. And when he first saw this craft, he thought it was some government black project, and like this is what the whole flying saucer thing was all about. It was just some military thing, until he entered the craft and he noted 2 things: the seats were built like they were for children, and 2, the when they like powered it on or something, there was some transparent screen of some sort, and the characters that came up on the screen were unlike any language or any like anything he's ever seen. Yeah, something more akin to Egyptian hieroglyphics. That was the closest thing you could compare it to, if I remember correctly.
See, that's a little fanciful to me, but
Really? I can believe that.
That's part of the fun. Yeah, fair enough.
Something else I want to get into is the perception that people have of UFOs, right? People think that, if a first world power like America or China or whatever has access to a UFO and UFO technology, that this would instantaneously upgrade their technology by magnitudes, right? And it seems counterintuitive, but it's not really the case. And I'll explain why with game theory. First of all, what you said, Moira, it is true. Like they're so compartmentalized in their secrecy that it's really hard for them to generate and synthesize new ideas. There's this quote. It's from a scientist, but I think he said like science really doesn't thrive when you're in silence. You need that cross collaboration from scientists. You need that discussion. And if you're not allowed to discuss anything and you're just working on it solely by yourself, you don't really make that much progress. And also you have to think of it from a game theory perspective, right? So you might also ask the question, well, why don't they just drop the secrecy levels? And the thing is, right, if you do that, picture you have two superpowers and one of the superpowers is able to infiltrate and possibly gain from information from the other power on how they're doing with their alien spacecraft and reverse engineering efforts. If one country is able to decipher something that the other country isn't and translate that into new forms of technology, that leap forward would be such a massive leap that would be the equivalent of inventing the atomic bomb, right? It would give that country so much political and geopolitical supremacy that there would be no way of fighting against that. So you kind of have to implement these like extremely strict security levels just to prevent that on both sides.
And,
sure.
And real quick, so to put it into perspective, to add to Tyson's point, he also describes a few other properties which aren't covered that often, but basically one of them was when a lighter was like a lit flame was brought near the reactor with element 115 and it was active, the flame would stop in time. So that's one thing. And the other thing was it had a force field like effect. When the reactor was active, the force of gravity acted. It was like two magnets repelling each other. You couldn't touch it. And inversely, you could weaponize that as having like real life force fields, if that makes sense. Like imagine a naval nuclear submarine with a force field around it, just swimming into foreign waters and blowing shit up,
That would be sick.
Yeah, just crazy ideas. It's endless.
Well, Ari, I also, I think I'm not sure if you caught this in the David Grush interview, but he also admits that not only does America have both an archaeological and crash site extraterrestrial vehicle, but he also implies that either China or Russia have those vehicle types as well, both archaeological and crash site. So I'm wondering which country or which region in the world are they sourcing these archaeological digs from?
Okay, here's something for you. So
Iraq. Stargates in Iraq.
Maybe.
I would love that so much.
But no, actually, in terms of modern UFO history, it was actually 1933 Italy during the reign of Mussolini. There was some kind of crash, and at first they thought it was the work of the Germans, thinking it was the Wunderwaffe or Die Glock or whatever. And it was so
Foo Fighters.
Foo Fighters, yeah, the term Foo Fighters actually comes from that, but this is something else. So
Okay.
they thought this is crazy. It got so crazy that the Pope got involved apparently, and they had to like obscure stuff in the Vatican. But that's besides the point. Later on, I think it got into the hands of the Germans or something, and then through Operation Paperclip, which is the declassified program where the US took on Nazi scientists, they also took possession of this craft. And I think this, in terms of modern history, this was probably the first of everything, really.
But that's a crash vehicle. I'm talking about the archaeological digs. Like, where are they digging these ones up? You know, you guys have any ideas?
I feel like a crashed
It'd be sick
UFO
if
is
it was
probably a
Egypt, you know,
catalyst
just like-
for finding archaeological. Because they say after the detonation of nuclear bombs during testing, that's when they kind of swarmed our planet, and I can see how that combined with having possession of a UFO could make it easier to find ancient ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they were monitoring us then, right?
If you wanted to build a gigantic black site, and have like some sort of like reverse engineering effort and all that stuff in Iraq for a Stargate, wouldn't you want to invade the country and make sure it's like a wasteland so that nobody goes there, you know? Sort of like what they did with the Iraq invasion.
It's like Sumeria, Mesopotamia, all of that stuff.
That's what people like to say.
I would love the Stargate story to be true so bad. You know, that there's something about that, you know, just like you go to like some Eastern country and there's just like a fucking Stargate right there. That speaks to me so much, man.
I'll never forget, and we'll probably do an episode on the website itself, but when I first found AboveTopSecret.com, there was a thread on Stargates in Iraq and Bush's real reason for wanting to go to war there. And again, you always think of those early things that kind of pique your interest in the paranormal, and that was one of mine. I find that captivating, so...
Later, I don't know how much weight you put on WikiLeaks, but there were leaked emails from Hillary Clinton talking with a John Podesta about the discovery of the tomb of Gilgamesh.
I do remember seeing something like that, or at least you describing it to me, but I think people have to use their own discretion for that.
But yeah, that is just some of the tech claims that Bob Lazar has made for the UFO. You guys have anything else interesting that you guys know about Lazar?
Yeah, so at the time in pop culture, UFOs kind of flew horizontally, right? Kind of slipped through the air like a flying saucer, like a frisbee. But Bob, he claimed that when they were actually like going all in and going full power, they turn belly up, like the belly of the ship turns, and then they kind of move forward that way. They like for interstellar flight, they'd really rip the fabric of space time and really almost skip forward. You wouldn't need to even travel at the speed of light. You could just like a wormhole, I guess, kind of. So he says this, and you know, no one really took note of it for a while until that video the Pentagon released of the Tic Tac. No, not the Tic Tac. The one that was rotating. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So in that video, you see the UFO actually rotating and turning belly up, and like before disappearing. And Lazar actually commented on this on an interview with, it might have been CNN or something, I don't know. But he says, yeah, that's exactly how it flew. It's interesting.
That is certainly something.
You know, I still don't fully believe that the government's being fully honest when they do their disclosure means. You know, I guarantee there's an ulterior motive behind that, but it's not clear what it is just yet. No.
Oh, they decided this was the time where it would be useful for them to put UFO disclosure into the public consciousness, give them something to talk about related to it. Notice how there hasn't been any real evidence, just some guy being on a podcast talking about things that he's seen. And also he happens to be from the government. No, thank you. But something I wanted to point out about Bob Lazar that I always like, listen, he has been so catapulted into the pantheon of UFO circuit mythos, it's not worth dissecting his story and being like, oh, but here he said this and here he said that. That's not fun to me. I enjoy what he's brought to the table and like kind of expanded the public understanding of the UFO phenomenon. And there was something interesting. His documentary started to grate on me after a while. Some parts of them I like, but Jeremy Corbell, he did a documentary with Lazar. He did the whole George Knapp thing, but he did make a good point when I was listening to Coast to Coast one time. He said, yeah, just because you can disprove one or two things about his story doesn't mean that does that mean that he's lying about everything else? When someone tells you a story and there might be a lie within their story or a fabrication or a misrepresentation or a mistake, heaven forbid, does that mean their entire story is false? So people like to really, if I told a story about something I did going to the supermarket yesterday, you could probably poke holes in it until you feel like it didn't even happen. Be like, what do you mean you went to this aisle? You said you went to that aisle after you went, you know what I mean? That's what people do with Bob Lazar. But my favorite part, so I thought that was a good point by Corbell, but my favorite part about the Bob Lazar story is that he has a W-2 form from when he worked in Area 51. And if you guys don't know, W-2 form is what you get to claim taxes when you're employed. So when you work at McDonald's, you get a W-2 form. So that's why I laugh when it's like Bob Lazar. It's like, here's my W-2. Like he was a McDonald's employee or something, but it was for Area 51. But the thing that's funny about it is that people's immediate knee-jerk reaction was to say that it was fake, but you have to do some pretty heavy homework to really try and get to the bottom of why you think it is fake. It's actually hard to disprove that this isn't his W-2 form from being employed as a contractor with the government. So it's actually kind of legitimate. I just think it's funny though. It's like, of course I worked for everyone. Here's my W-2. Government's like, yeah, I forgot.
It makes sense that they would have a W-2 for that kind of stuff as well, you know? Like, why wouldn't the government have W-2 for Area 51?
Sure, I just think it's funny that they do. It's like, you know, kind of attainable.
Yeah, I'm an alien reverse engineer, yeah.
Yeah, it's like just as much credibility as a McDonald's employee. You know, it's just funny part of the story.
Just even about credibility, I think like even just taking into account his claims about Element 115 and the hand scanning thing, I think that buys him more credibility than a lot of other people in the UFO scene.
The most damning evidence of all, and the one that buys most credibility for me personally, is some research George Knapp did really early on, which is he's doing a background check on him, and Lazar claimed to have gone to MIT, worked at Caltech and Los Alamos, and when they were confronted, they all denied it, all but one, I think, Caltech. And then later on, when Knapp got like some signed document giving him permission to get Lazar's document from Caltech, whatever, they stalled him for months and they said, "Oh, we can't give you this." But the most interesting of all is, I think it was either Los Alamos or MIT. When Knapp approached them, he asked them about Lazar. He said, "Did he ever work here? Did he ever do this and that?" They denied everything, and he's like, "Okay." So he went through. It was by chance he was going through the newspapers, and he found an article from. Oh, actually, no. Before that, he was looking through the phone book, and he found Bob Lazar's number and his contacts, like at MIT or Los Alamos, like in the phone book. Does that make sense? Did I word that well? And then later on, he found a news article about Lazar being a scientist at MIT or Los Alamos or something.
Oh.
There was an article on it? Okay.
A published newspaper. Undeniable. So when they deny, when in the face of this damning evidence, when they deny it so vehemently and refuse to comment, it says something, right?
Well, it's also funny because we like to pretend, especially this is rooted in media mostly, that the government is this all-seeing silent monolith that when it comes to its secrets can make no mistakes and it's always buttoned up. To me, it sounds very bureaucratic and governmental to let some scientist idiot slip through the cracks and spill your secrets, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Exactly.
That's not the most outlandish thing I've ever heard. Government secrets that they would love to keep from the public are leaked every other day. So this isn't that wild.
One of the best arguments I've seen in favor of Lazar was that So, for context, Lazar was like one of those. He was a super smart. He was, by all means, a real scientist, and he was a pretty crazy one as well. He'd build particle accelerators in his spare time, and he'd like build death lasers, and he made a jet powered Honda or something, and then he powered his Corvette with hydrogen.
That was how he got invited to Area 51 in the first place.
Right, yeah. So that's how he got contracted.
Yeah.
And like, if you were stuck on reverse engineering something as abstract and weird as a UFO, like maybe you'd want someone outside of the box to come in and take a look at it. And besides all of that, because he was so crazy and out there as a character, he's also easily dismissible in the public eye.
That is true. That is a good point, because a lot of people say, "Oh, just kill him or do this," but why even give him that? You know, because right now you've publicly discredited his character enough to the point where most people don't believe him, and he's, like you're saying, a strange, eccentric guy in himself. So you're better off just not drawing the attention to him and making him a martyr, as they would say in the F. Mulder in the X-Files, and just letting him go, you know, and that seems to be what's happened.
The last thing I'll say is, so apparently, according to Corbell, he has a dead man's hand, and that is, he supposedly snuck away a piece of element 115. And he hid it somewhere. Yeah, so George Knapp, he claimed that like Lazar actually showed him like a piece of element 115 that he kept, and he did an experiment. He you know the cloud chamber experiment, Tyson?
Yeah.
He did that, and then he demonstrated element 115 bending light. Like he pointed a laser at it or something, and he was demonstrating
Why would you use a
it.
cloud chamber for that?
Because I think to like activate it or something, you'd like fire protons, so he had like a particle accelerator going as well, and like I guess the cloud chamber would demonstrate that or something. But yeah, supposedly he hid that away somewhere, and that's why they haven't killed him yet, because apparently if he dies, he might reveal to the world this magical element.
The Corbell, Knapp, Tom DeLonge, Luis Elizondo, Greer, that all just needs to die. We just need to let it all go and get a new circuit going in the UFO credibility.
Let's say he did though. Man. That is an invaluable asset. Like that's like the most valuable asset in the world.
I'm sorry.
I find it hard to believe when someone says that they have a dead man's hand. It's like, man.
Dead Man Switch. Dead Man Switch.
Yeah, yes, but we had to go through all of that with McAfee, who I think is just a complete fraud. But whatever, we'll save that for another time. Oh, when he dies, there's going to be a Dead Man Switch. Oh no, he just killed himself in jail because of tax evasion.
Also, Assange had the Dead Man Switch, and he died, and the Switch activated, but no one cared about that. So, but we'll get into that at a later date.
Wow, so. You've given me some parting words to research.
That is our Lazar take on his engineering claims for the aircraft. But yeah, until next time, we are The Scary Door.